can you kind of take me through like why these are so helpful going forward into 2017?
Good question. First of all, we know that Memphis has been challenged for my entire career with our homicide rate. So I thought it was important to first make sure the facts are out there. When you look at, the presentation, 22 years of homicides, a couple of things come out. I mean, you see a pattern that just jumps out at you, and I thought it was important that because homicides to deal with that is a very complex problem. Most people want to pick one of their favorite things and say that, this is why there's a high homicide rate. But it's one of the most complex issues a community can deal with, and so putting the facts out to me was critical. The other thing that was important, or that is important, because I'll continue to share this presentation and explain what we found. We'll continue to work with the University of Memphis to do a deeper dive into what, and more of a scientific dive. This is really a presentation of the facts. But to see what the root causes are, what we can do as a community to focus. So one is, I thought it was critical for people to really know what they're talking about. I appreciate you taking time out to cover this story, because I knew I'll never get 20 minutes in prime time media coverage. Most people hear me in sound bites, and like I tell them that, you never know what I think about an issue because you only hear sound bites of what, is captured in some type of media. So, to get 20, 30 minutes to go over this is eye-opening for many. As we look at the facts, as we look at, 22 years of a problem, that has, just by 9, peaked over the high that we knew of. But we can't ignore this, is that, we've averaged 180, to 150 homicides my entire career or more. So I think it's important to recognize that this is a old problem that we should, as a community, make priority number one to bring down the homicide rate. But at the same token, to recognize that there are a lot of complex issues that contribute to the rise in violent crime. The other thing that is important, especially as we look across the nation, because in the major cities, or the cities that are part of Major City Chiefs Association, most of those cities are up in homicides. They're up in all violent crime. So we can't ignore what's happening nationally. We definitely can't ignore what's happening locally, and we can't ignore what's happening in Shelby County, because Shelby County experienced a dramatic increase in homicides, over 200% increase. So, we as a community, and I look at the community, I look at, not just Memphis, the metropolitan area, what we need to do to tackle this very difficult problem.
You've talked before about that a lot of these were gang related and domestic violence related, but then you took it a step further and you broke it down by day, time, zip code. Why is that so important, or how does that help you?
It's just more information, because these are questions that people often ask. So if I can give it to them where I have their attention, then we can talk about those issues. So not only did I say gangs and domestic violence, there are 4 things: gangs, guns, drugs, and domestic violence. So let's talk about gangs. We have to recognize that we have a gang problem, that young people are attracted to gangs. When we kind of look at the data, at least 60% of our homicides involve some type of gang connection, where the suspect is a gang member, the victim is a gang member, or is some type of gang motivated crime. We have a gang epidemic in the Mid-South. We also have a heroin epidemic, and a cocaine epidemic, and a prescription drug epidemic. So when we look at those things, we try to slice little pieces of the pie that we like, but we, have to look at the entire body of evidence out there. So gangs, guns, drugs, domestic violence. 3 of those homicides were heroin overdoses where we could trace back that heroin to a drug dealer. When you think about domestic violence, and last year we had, over 16,000 domestic violence related reports filed. So we have not just a problem with violence within, gangs and with individuals that are either selling drugs or hooked on drugs. We have a serious problem within the families. So if we can't solve the family issue, it's going to make it very challenging to solve all these other complex issues. So I just try to put everything up in the front where people can see it. They can hear it from me. And then I can also explain the very complex issue of, Uniform Crime Report, the National Incident-Based Reporting System, the Tennessee Incident-Based Reporting System, and then how we in Memphis report all victims of homicides. The UCR, NIBRS, nor TIBRS report all homicides. They don't, the justifiables and the unborn babies who, obviously, we have to pay attention to that, and that's a horrific loss, but it's not reported nationally. So when you start comparing Memphis to other cities, the first question should be, what reporting format are we looking at? Because if you don't know, we didn't have 228 homicides according to TIBRS, which is how we report crime in Tennessee. The other important issue is that if there are only 18 NIBRS compliant states, then there are only 18 states. And so if another city or state is not reporting crime the same way, you gotta be real careful on how you compare. And people always want to make a comparison, but I tell folks that, we can't even compare Memphis to Nashville. Nashville is metro. You can compare Shelby County to Nashville. So we have to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. We know what the reporting system is, and that people have to know the facts, because, I encounter people almost every week, and they say, Director, there's a murder in Memphis every day. And I said, well, how many days are there in a year? 365. I said, 228 total. Do we have a murder problem? Heck yes, we do.
So when you break it down by location, precinct, day, time, so moving forward in 2017, will you put more officers on the street during Monday, which you had the most murders? Do you look at it that way?
Let's understand something, that homicide is the most difficult crime to predict and prevent. And here's the strongest message that I try to leave people with. If the Memphis Police Department is your only tool in the toolbox, then you're in trouble. First of all, law enforcement alone can't solve those problems. The community has to look at the homicide problem. And until we look at it as a community problem, we're going to be very challenged to do anything about it. So I look at the communities that have been successful in reducing their homicide rate and murders. And the community actually provided more wraparound service than law enforcement ever could, because here's what law enforcement can do. We can operate based on the laws of the state of Tennessee and the policy and procedures of the police department. But people know. So it's amazing to me that in Memphis and in Shelby County in Tennessee, that laws that are passed by the legislature rarely get any scrutiny. So front page of the Commercial Appeal, there was a report on the federal government stepping back on doing background checks on individuals that have been deemed to have a mental health issue. That makes no sense. It makes no sense for the Tennessee State Legislature to pass everything gun. So guns in cars is one that I always will talk about. We saw an increase of the amount of guns being stolen. And we can't ignore that as the legislature passes laws that makes guns more accessible to criminals, that has a direct effect on our violent crime rate. As a police director, I've not made a single gun law, but we definitely have to enforce them, and we have to deal with what comes out of Nashville and what comes out of Washington, D.C. And people better pay attention, because now, as you know, the new legislation and this new season to talk about constitutional carry, universal carry, where a person doesn't have to have a permit to carry a gun. Well, guns in cars have already had a devastating effect in Shelby County. So what do we think universal carry or constitutional carry, what effect will that have? Again, not something that the police department created, but something that we have to deal with.
And talk to me about, we were just talking about the police correlation, like if the number of, we have 500 officers short, we're 500 officers short. Do you think that correlates?
I can tell you this. So here is a point where we had, either 2,400 or almost 2,400 officers. We had a very low number, actually the lowest number of homicides that I've witnessed in my entire career. I think there's a very strong correlation to the amount of officers and violent crime in general. We want to carve out homicides, but we can't, because there are a lot of other issues that wrap around there. So, and I think that we remember that is the mayor and my strongest priority is to increase our staffing levels, focus on retaining our, outstanding men and women that risk their life every day to make this community safe. But I'd love to get some help from the legislature. I'd love to get some help from the community, because these young men that I go talk to in 201 Poplar, they're not implants, they're Memphians. They went to school here, their families are here, they have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. And so the community, clergy, business, these families, they can't stand on the sideline and watch these young men go down the wrong road and throw their life away. So, because they're two victims that are the victims of violent crime, and these young men that are victimizing themselves and their families by committing these heinous crimes, because eventually we will catch up with them. We're going to prosecute them. They're going to ruin their life. And so the community has to do a better job in helping to get these young men on the right path and get them to stay on the right path, because there's no lack of cooperation among the criminal element to work together. We just need law-abiding people that care about the community to put aside some differences and work together as a community to make this one of the safest cities in the nation.
Anything surprising in your presentation? Like that Mondays, for example, that was surprising to me that Monday would be the day most murders happened. And I think, I think we saw, a murder in every zip code as well?
Maybe I'm not sure. Every zip code, it's a big city. So,
yeah.
I think that sounds cute, but it really doesn't mean anything.
But I'm just saying that
here's what's important. If we look across the city, we see that, if you live in a particular part of town, you need to be concerned about what's happening in the rest of the town. Just like I talk to people that, in the metropolitan area, we all need to be concerned what's happening in the metro area. Here's a good example. My neighbor house catches on fire. Okay, I need to be concerned because that fire can spread. So if it requires me to, help a firefighter get a water hose or a bucket, then I need to act like my neighbor's house is on fire. So this is a community problem. The day and times, that's all data driven. That's how we police. So you asked a question earlier about what will we do. We focus on data driven policing. We look at where crime is occurring, when is it occurring, and what specific crime is occurring, so we can deploy resources. So we're going to continue to do all we can to combat it. Our primary responsibility is, when a homicide occurs, is to investigate it, and apprehend the offender so we can bring that individual to justice and hopefully give that family some closure. It is all of our responsibility to do everything we can do to focus on prevention, intervention, reentry programs, because a large number of our homicide suspects had a previous felony conviction. So how we deal with convicted felons, and we talk about jobs. I mean, we can ignore all these things, and most people don't want to deal with those. Everybody can focus on law enforcement, and we take that responsibility. We don't take that responsibility lightly. We recognize it, but it's going to take more than law enforcement to help us get out of this tough spot.
Anything else you want to say about, anything you want to show in your presentation?
Well, you got the time, I got the information. So, we talked about justifiables. I think that, we have to pay attention to, if we look at the high that we talked about in 1993, that, we were pretty much 9 over. We had more justifiables that gave us those numbers. Some other things I think that I'd like to highlight is, when we talk about Tibers, there were 195 murders in Memphis, 2 cases of negligent manslaughter, because the justifiables, the previous year homicides, and the unborn babies are not counted according to the Tibers definition. But in Memphis, we tell you all of our victims, because everybody's precious. So, a lot of people have criticized us and said, well, Memphis, you overcount your homicides. You shouldn't do that. Very confusing. So I do want to go on record this year letting everyone know that in 2018, we're going to report according to the Tibers definition, because it gets everybody confused. And so, some people will say, didn't do it this year because people would have said, Director, you're trying to cook the books. No, I'm not. I'm trying to make sense out of a very complicated thing that we should have corrected a long time ago. So 2018 will be the year of correcting any data reporting that is problematic or that has changed, because the definitions change and we have to evolve. I think the other things that are important, we talk about zip codes, and we talk about that there's everyone in the city should be concerned about what's going on with our homicide problem. And that's why the map is important. When you look at the map, you can't deny it. When you think about, council districts, I do this so my council members can understand the importance of, when we ask for a budget, we need it. And if you want to, talk about how do we tackle these problems, we have to know first what the problem is and where it's occurring to know how to solve it. We break it down by, these are robberies. We break it down by domestic violence. We look at suspects and whether victims who were gang members, suspects that are gang members, and gang motivated. We also look at our repeat offenders. And like I said, when 18% of the suspects are repeat offenders, then you have a recidivism problem. So, that's why, partnering with the corrections is important to talk about what programs do you have. But often we don't focus on that. We ask the police for that. Corrections is not in my lane. That's a state, federal, and a county issue that we have to pay attention to. You talked about the day a week. I think it's just important we know what's going on. So, I tease my pastors here on Sunday and say, hey, I need y'all to do a little more work on Sunday, because Monday is a very violent day if you just look at the numbers. You talked about zip code. I thought it was important to show, if we talk about resources and where do we put community resources in, that's where the zip codes become important, because we can look at vacant property. We can look at what's in the land bank per zip code. We do a lot of census data per zip code, so the zip code becomes important. In incidents by hour, most of these incidents happen late at night, and people need to be at home. Your kids, you should know where your children are at. And people say, Director, you need to enforce the curfew more. The Memphis Police Department doesn't have kids. Those parents need to make sure they're paying attention to where their children are at. And if the Memphis Police Department is your only babysitting and child care solution, then I need folks to step up and be responsible parents. You know, the average age of a homicide victim is 32 years old. I think that's critical because often people want to focus on the youth, and I say, yes, you got to focus on the youth, but you can't ignore the parents. You can't ignore the older brothers. You can't ignore, you know, folks that are they're looking up to. You have to have programs for them. You know, and again, we see the breakdown of our victims, and these are all adults. So, you know, I can't ignore my adults. These are the juveniles. Only 9.2% of the victims were juveniles. You know, you think about our suspects. The average age of our suspects is 27 years old. So, you know, again, the people that are doing community service type things, that have outreach programs, said, Director, thank you for sharing that. That's important for us to know when we're talking about what programs we're going to have. I say, hey guys, just don't leave the parents out. You know, here it is. Only 5% of the suspects were juveniles, and most of those juveniles, that was family violence. So, you know, domestic violence, you know, reducing violence, reducing the access to guns is something we have to do. And I think also when we looked at the year in a glance to kind of see that, you know, the start of the year, so weather is a factor. More people are out. It's spring-like conditions in January. You know, we're looking at more and more gun legislation. We're looking at more people that don't have conflict resolution skills. So when I talk to Shelby County Schools, and I'll follow up with Dorsey Hobson and say, hey, Director, conflict resolution has to be a primary subject in the school system. You know, how we resolve these conflicts and not resort to violence. We already have our Dare Great programs where we're teaching kids to resist drugs and gangs and bullying, but everybody has to wrap around those things. You know, we talked about, you know, robbery, victim relationship. Most of them knew each other. Okay, and here's what was startling to me, that when we look at, you know, our homicide detectives did a great job. They solved the vast majority of the homicides. This year, they've solved 6 homicides that occurred last year, and this is in January. So they're doing a great job of getting out there. You know, we talked about, you know, the types and how they're related, more percent. So when you control for the solved homicides and take out the ones that we're not sure about, 70% of the victims knew the suspect or were acquainted with them. That is so important because people come up to me every day and say, Director, I'm scared that I'm going to be a victim of a homicide. And I ask them, okay, are you on drugs? Well, no, I'm not on drugs. Are you in a gang? No, I'm not in a gang. Do you have violence in your home with your family? No. Well, you have a very small chance of being a victim. But if you're on the opposite side, if you're in a gang, you got violence in the family, you're on drugs, you need to watch out, because the data says that there's a possibility that you could be a homicide victim, or you might have a better chance of being a homicide victim than the general population. And I think that just makes sense to people when I break it down and say it in that particular way. You know, we talked about gangs. You know, most of them, your juveniles, yes, is an issue, but it's a small slice of the pie. We need to invest in our young people. We just can't forget the adults that are wreaking havoc in our communities. And, you know, domestic violence, you know, we talked about stations, so we can see where we need to focus resources. You asked about that earlier. Weapons. Folks, I can't ignore the firearms. 186 involve firearms, but my legislature passes everything gun. And the public is silent. That doesn't make any sense. I'm just a common sense person. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. And relationship to, you know, here's our domestic violence. category, and here are acquaintances. So the vast majority knew each other. So we have to focus on family violence. And, you know, here's the race question. So I can't ignore the data. 228 homicide victims, 200 are African American. You know, 169 African American men, 31 African American females. I can't ignore that. So, you know, we talk about where we're going to focus our attention. Here's a great place to start. So, you know, I just tell folks, I'm going to give you the facts. You help me figure out what we need to do about it. And those are the facts, and I kind of leave it at that. As we continue to get smarter, dig into this problem deeper, and decide what we as a community are going to do. And notice I say we. Most people say me, because they're always saying, Director, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? I said, well, first of all, we're starting off on the wrong foot. What are we going to do as a community to solve this difficult problem? Because law enforcement is only one tool in the toolbox.
Thank
Did you want to go
You're
over
welcome.
those forms? They're up there.
Oh, yeah, I heard about these new forms.
Because my legislature does not appear to be willing to help me out, I'm going to, you know, ask our community to do a little more positive steps, because often, you know, people are carrying guns in cars, but they have not taken the simple responsibility of doing a household inventory. So this is just, you know, inventorying your household equipment. So if you have a TV, we'd like to know, you know, just categorize it, catalog it, so if, you know, your home is burglarized, at least you have an idea of what was taken, serial numbers, you know, take a picture of it with your smartphone. So this is not for us, this is for individuals in Memphis or wherever they want to share it. Document what you have, description, features, you know, make, model, write the serial number down, put the cost down. Take a picture of it with your smartphone, for we're going to ask our citizens to act. Access, catalog, take a photo.
Has that been an issue though with guns? Have people not
Yes,
been?
that is a major issue. So our citizens need to have, you know, responsibility. And then when we talk about responsible gun ownership, that is making sure that you are keeping up with your stuff. So, you know, once they do that, keep it in a safe place, engrave, you know, your driver's license number on items. When we talk about guns,
Because I think we did a story recently that showed how many guns have been stolen, especially out of cars. So
over 800 guns stolen from cars, so an increase of 200 plus guns. So when you think about over 2,000 guns were stolen in all the categories. So when we talk about guns, same thing. You know, if it's a handgun or a rifle, we just want the caliber, you know, unique features. If there's, you know, a crack or a color, you know, what is the make, what's the model, and what's the serial number, and what's the cost. We need our citizens to at least be responsible. You know, you're going to carry a gun, at least know what the gun is, so if it's stolen, you can report it stolen and not just say it was a silver gun, I think it was a 9mm. So that's not going to help us help themselves. So we're asking our citizens to help us, to help them, to help our community, because I need our citizens to keep up with their guns. And I would like our citizens to put a little more pressure on the legislature to make sure they do the right thing. But here's the good news. Memphis police officers, we recovered 2,761 guns off the street. So the officers are out there.
that was last year.
Yes, the officers are out there working hard, but, you know, so many times they encounter, you know, someone carrying a gun, and they're within the guidelines of the law, since the legislature has extended the home to a car. And, you know, if the gun's not stolen, it's not a convicted felon, then often the officer's hands are tied.
Anything else you want to get across?
Nope, this is so important, and I hope people pay attention. We're gonna post it on our website. We're streaming on Facebook Live, so everybody can get it. And I think if you post these forms on your website, will help. Again, everybody can do their little part.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
We appreciate it.